I'm going to talk a little bit about mold, the silent genocide, and brain damage. It's the one area in my research that began in 1986. I was trained and blessed to have a biochemist from Japan who owned a drugstore take me under his wing. And despite the fact that I could neither read nor write beyond the level of a 5-year-old child, he dealt with that. He drew me little pictures, and he trained me on the world that we cannot see, that microscopic world. And he covered viruses, bacteria, dust mites, because I was living in a gas mask and sleeping in a gas mask, and I had to do that for 3 years. I couldn't breathe until I learned how to control and recognize that when people had a cold, for me that meant I would get lung infection. And it's a very complicated study, and I have continued to track viruses and bacteria for 37 years. And for the most part, I was able to protect myself from people because people are really ignorant. They just, well, look, we're in COVID and they're doing it. They just spread it willy-nilly and they don't care who they kill. I always said death would be a welcome relief because I was living with a fate worse than death. I was living with dying, and it's extremely painful. The pain that I endured is the same kind of pain that cancer patients are on morphine when they're dying. But I tracked everything that had triggered all of my attacks from the age of 6. And I crippled, but I had mental blackouts, short periods, a month, 2 months, whatever. But my brain always came right back, and I was genius. And I was able to work for 23 years because although my legs would cripple and my body would crash, my brain was genius. And suddenly, I lost all memory. I couldn't read nor write beyond the level of a 5-year-old child. And of course, I could no longer work because I worked in the investment world, and I wasn't worth keeping alive unless I could make money. But I came across, again, Toxic Mold Support Group on Facebook. And through them talking about 2 children, teenagers, for instance, were having fits of rage and other neurological disorders and memory lapse and memory fog, and it connected. Okay, in 1981 to 1984, I was sleeping in a basement, and it had been semi-renovated, but not fully, and the walls had mold. And it was the one thing that Mr. Mack, a biochemist, didn't cover was mold. So I have been working with people trying to help them because I reversed all the brain damage with raw okra. But there is scientific evidence, particularly in Russia in 1837 and in Finland, about the neurological damage. You may not even have any physical symptoms, although I certainly did, but you will have neurological damage. So in one person, like these 2 teenagers, terrible fits of rage. There was a child in England who became extremely violent, and they connected it to the mold in the bread. Bread can turn to become moldy very quickly, and he was reacting to the mold in bread. Now that study on the bread, I actually read about that in 1988, 89, somewhere around there. in the Sun tabloid in Florida. And it had made the British tabloids because his behavior was just so violent. And they had to hospitalize him, and he went through all kinds of tests, and they finally identified it was mold. Now, I had mold poisoning in June of this year, and I went into hypothermia for 4 days. I was living with dying as usual, but I couldn't go to a hospital, and not because of COVID, but because they will not treat me for being poisoned. We don't have that in Canada or anywhere in North America. They used to treat you for poisoning in the Roman Empire like 2,000 years ago, but God forbid we should admit we're being poisoned today. But what I want to point out to you people, right now Facebook is blocking me. When I get unblocked, I'll try to share this information and I'll just type it up. But mold is the silent genocide. And those mycotoxins stay in your body and in your brain for the rest of your life. Because I had the mold mycotoxin exposure from 81 to 84. And after that, I did not. Now, I've gone through my entire history with the help of my mother, who was alive until February 2017, and people who knew me in Toronto, because I had to research myself. I didn't remember who I was. I really lost all memory. But I tracked it all, and that was the one piece of the puzzle that was missing, was what caused my brain damage. And it was mold. And the other thing you need to know is that all the chemicals, pesticides, gas, oil, diesel, so many chemical additives in food, junk food, sugar, they all cause disease. Like, nobody's getting off this planet alive. But for those suffering from mold exposure, if you can't get out of the environment, you can detoxify and keep yourself functioning well enough until you can deal with the mold in your environment. And I'm not going to get involved in the construction. There are many contractors who are expert in that, and I'm not going to deal with that. I'm only going to deal with your health issues, because I have survived it. And I'm 80 years old, and I still take attacks, yes. I have autoimmune damage, yes. I also have a tumor doing nerve damage, yes. But my brain is still 100%. And that's because of okra. Raw. It has to be raw. But you can have all kinds of depression, rage, memory loss, neurological damage from the mold mycotoxins. And I didn't remove them until 1995 because I didn't know I had been poisoned by mold. And when I removed them in 1995 and I was able to regain memory, I didn't know until 2021 that it was mold that had caused the brain damage. But so it doesn't matter how many years later those mycotoxins are in your system, and they can be removed. So there's always hope. But it is the silent genocide, because health inspectors, doctors, scientists, government, the construction of RVs, the construction, people who have been in floods, the construction of your homes. There is so much mold damage. And I'm not an expert on how to solve that, But I do know that mold is developed by leaking plumbing, leaking roofs, leaking basements, water into the basements, through the cement, into the floors. It has to be dry, has to be 35% humidity level, and they will not grow in freezing temperatures, but they don't die. You don't kill them. So it's very complicated on the construction level, but you can reverse the disease completely. But from there, you're going to have to control. Your immune system is going to be damaged. You're going to have, some have kidney damage, some have organ damage. I have bowel damage, digestive system damage, all of the above. So through lifestyle and organic diet, which I have all that on my website for free, non-profit, infinitum, no restrictions. You can share it, you can republish it, you can do what you want with it. I put it out there for humanity, to save the children and people from suffering as I did. So bless everyone, and be aware that even if you don't think you've been affected, you might die from a heart attack, you might die from cancer years later, and you are being affected. And to those who have symptoms and are being mistreated by their family and friends and society and doctors around them, fight back. I took to the streets in a gas mask, and I fought for our right to be treated with respect. But I don't use words like chemical hypersensitivities, because they won't accept that. I give them the language they want to hear. I say I have severe allergies, and that usually shuts them up. Okay, and sorry this is so long, but it's really important that you understand what mold can do to your brain, the damage it can cause. Okay, over and out. See you in the Twilight Zone.